So just a little bit ago, I reached level 100, and I'm here to provide my honest critique of Diablo 4. I'm going to go through each part of the game that I felt was meaningful and worth talking about. Keep in mind that we are literally only a week and a half into the game. That's only if you started with the early access. So there's a lot of things that can happen with this game, and I'm having a ton of fun. But with that said, let's actually talk about what was good and what wasn't so good. So let's first talk about the campaign. Now, I know some of you might be like, well, why is this guy going to talk about the campaign? He doesn't do the campaign, or he skipped it on this playthrough. You're right, I did skip it on this playthrough. But between all of the times that I've played Diablo, I actually got a full experience of the entire storyline, and actually really enjoyed it. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. The storyline was constantly engaging. Spoilers here for this initial part of the campaign. The battles with the Elias and the fact that he was kind of the main villain of the beginning of the story, and how they were kind of implementing a lot of the Diablo feel to how he was sort of invincible for that short period of time. I really enjoyed the conversations between Lorath and Neyrelle. I know some people didn't like Neyrelle as a character. I actually found her to be pretty engaging and honestly sort of hopeful towards the game. This game is very dark and gloomy, and it was kind of a nice offsetting to have her character in the game. And then, of course, the overall cutscenes and style and art of the game going through the campaign was absolutely amazing. The only thing that was a little bit lacking, in my opinion, for the campaign, which is why it's not a 10 out of 10, is some of the boss fights weren't as cool or engaging as I thought. Especially, skin spoilers, the last boss fight with Lilith, and the fact that it didn't really have a ton of dialogue. The boss fight was relatively easy, especially for those of you that kind of were going through with a built-out build. Overall, it just kind of felt like a one-and-done type thing where I didn't have to really try too hard. I was 15 levels, or 14 levels rather, underneath the level recommendation, and I easily beat it, and there wasn't even much story. I'm interested to see where the expansion will go, with Mephisto's shard being off into the middle of nowhere with Neyrelle, and I will be paying attention to it, definitely going forward. So I don't know about you all, but for those of you that are playing the story and actually engaging with it, man, oh man, is it good. And I definitely recommend, if you haven't already, and although you got some spoilers if you listen to this, go through the storyline at least once, because it's really good. Now on to the actual content or the gameplay of the game. I'm going to start off with dungeons. Now, when I say I maxed out, I mean I maxed out the power level of my character, and I've experienced every piece of content. I have Renown completely done. I have all the waypoints unlocked, the strongholds. I've done everything in terms of leveling. I've tried every single build on the road. The only things that are left are to 100% the game, and I have not done that yet. But in terms of dungeons and the ones I've experienced 80% of them. So yeah, there's nothing really new left. And as for dungeons, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Now, the reason why I give it a 7 out of 10 is because to me, 7 out of 10 is a little bit above average. It's just going to be good gameplay, nothing revolutionary, and something that I absolutely expected out of any Diablo game or any RPG in general, a way to go through, grind out the levels, and to go through and kill monsters. That's it, right? The objectives are bland. They're not super exciting, which is why this is not a 10 out of 10. And the other criticism I have to make of the dungeons are going to be that a lot of the changes that they said they were going to make, like the ability for the monsters to run after you for slay all dungeons, a lot of the backtracking, that really hasn't been fixed a whole lot. And so there is backtracking, and some of the objectives can get a little old sometimes. So it's not a 10 out of 10, but to me, if you signed up to play Diablo and kill monsters and run dungeons, you're gonna get that experience, and it's gonna be a smooth experience. So that at least is a good thing. Now, the open world, arguably the most controversial thing on this list and in this game entirely. To me, this is an 8 out of 10. I know some people are gonna disagree with that, hard to disagree with that. But to me, as an MMO player, I think the open world has been done exceptionally well. Going through the town and seeing players in some of the more popular towns like Kyovashan, or potentially any of the other towns like Saragar or Ked Bardu, etc. You're going to see players. But what's more exciting about that is the things like potentially going in and doing an event and getting progression for people in the area killing monsters, right? It's not just an open world where, when you tag a monster, they get credit, you do not. everyone shares that progression and it kind of scales decently well. Things like, for example, the open world events, or if there's a Helltide zone spawning, which there isn't yet, those things are actually really enjoyable overall in the game. And even things like world bosses are going to be pretty enjoyable, for me at least. I know some people have some criticisms of it. And overall, the biggest criticism that I have of the open world, the reason I'm giving it an 8 out of 10, is because, well, in some situations, it can kind of be annoying to have other players there, kind of ruining your farm or ruining your, in general, just progression of the game, because there are some areas of the game, like the ghoul farm over here, or doing Helltide zones, or doing these things, that could actually feel a little bit better potentially if you were solo, because the solo farms aren't as good in the open world, which is why dungeons and the PvP zones are going to be more your way for farming. But overall, to me, it's an 8 out of 10, and if you like open world, you're definitely going to enjoy this. The only question is if you like it or dislike it. To me, it's either you hate it or you love it. That's it, right? It's not like, oh, it's like a 7 or 6 out of 10. It's either an 8, 9, 10 out of 10, or it's like a 3, 4, 2 out of 10 because people hate it. And I totally understand why people would hate it. And if you are someone that doesn't enjoy seeing other players, you want to have your solo experience, you probably won't like the open world in general. So side quests and Cellars are also another part of the kind of open world there. Depends on where you're doing it, right? Because some side quests can be in dungeons, some side quests can be in the open world, some side quests can be in Cellars, etc. There's like kind of odd situations you got going with side quests and Cellars, so I figured I'd rate them separately. And to me, these get a 4 out of 10. The Cellars are a little bit more fun than the side quests, and the side quests can be sometimes engaging depending on the storyline. The story is what keeps the side quests interesting. In fact, even while grinding out on stream, sometimes I just sit back, relax, and actually listen to some of the dialogue. I've not listened to all of them. I have listened to some of them, and some of them can be actually really engaging and really fun. But it's only good if you actually listen to the dialogue. If you don't listen to the dialogue, and even if you do, some cases, some of the dialogue is pretty mediocre, and overall, it just feels like a lot of mini chores. Because some of the quests don't even have a good storyline associated with them. And so, you know, they like pick up like some sort of cache and come over here and pray at this statue, or find this statue over here and say yes, or come over here and pick up this, kill monsters and get their bones. It feels like a traditional MMORPG quest line, like WoW Classic, where it's like I have to kill wolves, get their hides, you know? It's just not super engaging to me, and to be honest, oh, here's one, Exorcist Cache, gather spirit anima, so I kill enemies and gather spirit anima. It's just not super exciting, and to be honest, they get a 4 out of 10 for me. The Cellars, again, are a little bit more exciting, just doing them, but they're just like a mini dungeon, and oftentimes they're just less fun than a dungeon, so yeah, 4 out of 10. Now, in terms of group play, this one is gonna get a 9 out of 10 for me. There's a few reasons for that, but for one, group play feels rewarding. And I, in general, think that MMO type games or games where you have an open world, where you have other players, it generally should be that you get rewarded for playing with other players. Now, some people will disagree with that, and they'll say, well, I want to not get punished when I'm playing solo, and I totally understand that perspective. At the end of the day, what it allows you to do is just progress quicker, which, you know, is up to you whether you like that or not. Now, in terms of actually playing with friends, it is just a super enjoyable experience. You know, going through dungeons, and if I were to run over to Champion's Demise and showcase that one, a lot of the dungeons have a lot of coordination with them to where if you actually strategize as a group, you're going to get a lot of effectiveness out of it, and it actually just makes it a little bit more fun to combo a lot of your skills together. Now, some things don't work intuitively like you might think, which is why it's not a 10 out of 10, and I really dislike that part of it, but it's not actually a big component. It's just more of like a quality of life update thing where if they just specify what works with what, it'll be a lot easier. But things like, for example, the Druid popping poison doesn't work with the Rogue's poison, which is a combo that DM and I initially tried basically right away. But doing things like, hey, I'm going to group up, you pulverize slam, or hey, I'm going to go ahead and tank, you kite out the monsters, or whatever it is. There's a lot of synergy within groups, and there's a lot of things you could do that make it a little bit more exciting, which I find to be extremely enjoyable and extremely fun. I think that if you're going to have a game that's leaning towards group play, and you're going to make it so that group play doesn't feel good and is kind of miserable to go with, then you're going to have a problem on your hands. But having things like the Champion's Demise dungeon where you could split off in 3 different lanes, or having some sort of mechanic where you can combo your skills together makes it for a very, very enjoyable experience, and the reason why I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. Now let's talk leveling experience. Now I want to break this up into 3 parts. You have the 1 to 50 process, the 50 to 70 process, and the 70 to 100. Based on how good of a player you are, if you have friends that can boost you, what class you are, these levels can change differently to different levels, but 1 to 50 is generally going to be World 1 and 2, 50 to 70 is going to be World Tier 3, and 70 to 100 is going to be World Tier 4. Again, that'll change based on who you are. The early leveling, 1 to 50, is actually very quick. You get early levels and get your initial 25 skill points. You can start to unlock your ultimate and your basic full skill tree, along with your couple of skill points in your renown system. You get the first renown point extremely easy. It only requires 200 renown, and you mostly get that just from walking around the map. So this is very, very quick, and you oftentimes get very strong very quickly, especially when you start to upgrade points into your core skill. You start to get things like the poison imbuement, for rogue, but any class that starts to use some of their unique class skills, you start to get very powerful very quickly. However, it does start to slow down when you reach that level 40 point, and into level 50 does slow down quite significantly. And at level 50 into 60 and 70 is also when it starts to become a pretty big grind. However, as soon as you hit 50, you do unlock that World Tier 3 when Monster XP jumps up crazy amounts. And assuming you've finished campaign and you've gone through a lot of the advice that a lot of YouTubers and myself have given, you finish campaign, you access World Tier 3, you can skyrocket your leveling process. Now, during this time, I generally recommend going for altars because that's going to give you XP while also giving you power and giving you that easy access to World Tier 4. But if you do not do it, then guess what? Your World Tier 3 level 50 to 70 process is going to be exactly the same as the 70 to 100. The best XP farm in the game is where I'm standing right now, Champion's Demise. It has a close second and a close third, but all the other dense elite pack have been nerfed, so this is where you go. And to be honest, this is the process to leveling. Now, in terms of how strong you feel, when you reach those World Tier 3 and 4 breakpoints, you get a massive power boost. And then after that, it's a slow grind for your Paragon points, and you honestly don't feel like you're getting that much stronger unless you're missing a component to your build, okay? And to be honest, that is partially due to the nature of the fact that you can get best in slot gear at level 70 as soon as you unlock World Tier 3. Your gear isn't actually locked behind your level, it's locked behind your world tier. So you get the best gear at level 70, potentially, and there's only minor min-maxing that you can do. So you get 10-15% stronger from your gear, maybe as you approach, assuming you have like decent gear to start off with, and the major component of your power is going to be in your Paragon board. And well, overall, it's actually not that bad, and to be honest, this is a very typical ARPG grind. Any other ARPG, like if I'm playing Diablo 3, if I'm playing Diablo 2, you're going to be running the same thing over and over and over and over again, and it's no different. And if that's something that you don't enjoy, then well, you can go back and do your renown grind and finish off your renown, which you can get a lot of levels from this, or you can just run around and do whatever dungeon you want. But if you have solo, if you're solo, or if you're in a group, running into Champion's Demise and resetting it is going to be just absolutely the best. So I don't know if I said this earlier, but this is going to be an 8 out of 10 for me. The only criticism I have would be the ARPG criticism, which is that it's repetitive. But to be honest, anything that I've ever done in any ARPG feels a little bit repetitive. And in fact, any game that I've played grinding to the top is going to be repetitive. But you don't have to do this. This is just the meta strategy. And so it really depends on how you want to go about leveling. And in fact, you can actually level through nightmare dungeons, which will progress your glyphs and your Paragon even faster. So there's other ways you can kind of level and have some fun that way. Now, this might be a hot take, but I'm going to give PvP in this game a 10 out of 10. Now, this is premature, I think, a little bit because it's hard to rate PvP without having everyone level 100, but I have PvP with other level 100 players, and I PvP with level 90 plus. I've also PvP'd against level 70 plus. It is what it is, right? When you're level 100, you are the king of the PvP zone, unless someone else is also level 100. And it has been an absolute blast. It feels like there are some builds that have some really powerful combinations, and there probably is needing some balance. But to be honest, I don't really care that it's unbalanced because the nature of having a higher level is going to make it unbalanced. So I'm always going to be stronger. And because it's an open world, it's not necessarily going to pair you against equal level players. You're just going to go in and blast people, which means that it's kind of always going to be unbalanced just by nature of PvP. So to me, it's a 10 out of 10 just because of how fun and enjoyable it is. I don't feel like I can provide a criticism on the balance of things because, again, if I'm level 100 and I join in an open world, I only have like 7 other potential slots for people to be in there. And most often than not, it's going to be, as you just saw, level 50s and 70s running around. So to me, 10 out of 10, the most fun I've had in this game so far has been progressing my character and PvPing. Number 1 and number 2. Now, I want to talk about the mount just for a little bit. This one's just a minor one, but it is something that you use all the time. To me, this is a 9 out of 10. It is extremely fun to use the mount. The only problem I have, which is why it's preventing me from getting to a 10 out of 10, is because a lot of the pathing things can be a little bit odd, right? Like if you're just clipped on like something just directly to the side, it can be a little bit odd. But overall, the way you're moving around the mount and how fast it is and how good it feels to kind of charge up a lot of those hits and just cruise around and explore the scenery, I much prefer that oftentimes than, you know, teleporting around and just like having fast movement speed. I just think it's a little bit more of an enjoyable experience. The other thing that could happen is when you get to a point where you have to like press your dodge key to jump over something, I would like to see that the horses could do that a little bit more easy rather than having to perfectly line it up. But overall, super fun to use the mount. And here comes the biggest criticism that I have of this game. And to be honest, I think the game is very solid and at a place where I think that a lot of things on this list can be improved, and they're not perfect, but overall, it's been an extremely enjoyable experience. However, quality of life in this game is lacking quite a bit. In fact, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 10. There are some things that they've done decently well, but to be honest, I'm going to have a laundry list of critiques here because it kind of has, in my opinion, below the bare minimum, and which is why it's a 4 out of 10 for me in this game. First thing is they don't have a gem bag, which is a lot of things that people complain about. I'm not going to talk about that too much. They plan on adding it. Overall, inventory management is just a absolute meme right now. Things like stashes in not every single town, things like side quests not giving you indicators, which a lot of people don't really want to deal with, okay? Things like your Paragon board having to manually go through and remove points from. Oh my goodness. This is dumb, okay? They have a refund all for skill assignments, and by the way, it's extremely expensive, which is also a bad thing. Before I said gold isn't that bad, it isn't that bad until you reach level 90, actually. When you reach level 90, the gold costs like 4x's, and you start to have to spend like 17 million gold to remove your whole Paragon tree, and you can see here about 4.3 million gold to refund your skill tree. It is crazy how expensive it gets immediately as reaching level 100. And keep in mind the gold costs that or the gold generation that you're getting doesn't really scale all that much higher as you reach level 100. So you're still gaining the same gold you were at level 70 if you're in World Tier 4 and you're going as fast as you were, although it's going to be, you know, a little bit faster. And yet you still have to spend way more. There's a lot of things that is missing in terms of quality of life, and I expect this to be the easiest thing for them to improve. Like, for example, just providing a refund all button for your Paragon. I don't know why this doesn't exist. I've changed my Paragon board out like 6 or 7 times at this point, and each time I am miserable because I have to manually go through and right click, and there's a bunch of things like, oh, you can't remove this node or whatever because it's connected to another node. It's just annoying, to be honest. And there's a lot of things in this game that's like that. So yeah, 4 to 10, that's where I'm gonna put it. Now let's talk skill tree / builds here. This is going to get a 7 out of 10 for me. And the reason I say that is because I think the build diversity is lacking, but I think everything else about it is good. Meaning I think that the straightforwardness of the skill tree really appeals to kind of the audience that it's looking for, and honestly is very intuitive and yet can have a lot of interesting combinations with it. However, due to that being simplistic and relatively straightforward, which I think is always a good thing for your casual audience, the bad side is there's not a lot of build diversity, and to be fair, there's not a lot of options, right? I have 5 core skills as the rogue. Generally speaking, I have no way to build a build out without one of my 5 core skills, right? I can't do like some of their classes, like run some mastery skill, right? My poison and my imbuement skills here literally work with my core skills. My traps and concealment and grenades, they basically are buffs, debuffs. The trap is a little bit of damage, but you can't really use that as a damage skill necessarily. Your agility skills here don't really do damage. I have to use a core skill as with a rogue. Now, some other classes do have some other options, but generally speaking, every class has to use a core skill, which means you have essentially like 5 builds for every class, and oftentimes there's only 1 or 2 that are really viable. And in this case, for the rogue, it's 1, and that's Twisting Blades. Even after the nerfs, Twisting Blades is still way faster for any farm scenario, for anything like that. The only other option is sometimes the ranged rogue builds can push a little bit higher, but for 99% of the other content, it's going to be Twisting Blades. So, you know, it is what it is. That's why it's a 7 out of 10. Good baseline, above average, I'd say, but it could use a decent amount of work to get some additional builds. I think what they need to do realistically is just buff up some skills and balance them out, because they actually have a lot more build diversity within the game already. It's just that we're not seeing them because they're not balanced. But even after they do that, it's still a little bit lacking. Now, before we talk about the end game, I want to talk about my overall experience in terms of the feeling of the game. To me, this gets a 10 out of 10. It is a modern ARPG, and to me, the skills, the way they interact with the gameplay and monsters and all that stuff feels better than any other ARPG I've played so far. It feels responsive. The sound animation with connected into your abilities and to the enemies have distinct differences and feel very, very good, as well as overall just running through the game, seeing a lot of the areas of the game, and just in general how the game feels and the atmosphere of the game feels very, very good. And I really couldn't have asked for a better feeling. It does feel like a Diablo game. It feels way bigger than a normal Diablo game, and yet it still keeps that, despite the open world, the dark, the gloomy, the atmospheric, almost depression-like Diablo experience that you're looking forward to if you're a Diablo player, okay? The same thing that I kind of felt in Diablo 1, Diablo 2. I feel like Diablo 3 kind of lost that with the arcadey style cosmetics and some of the things like when you enter a town, there's like 6 people there, and then you would leave the town and there's just a bunch of demons, but you go back and there's like just a safe haven. I don't know, it kind of felt a little off to me. I feel like Diablo 3 kind of missed the mark on the Diablo atmosphere, whereas this game really nailed it. Now we talk about the end game. And to me, there's only one end game. There's only one. You know, you could talk about Tree of Whispers, which is unlocked after the campaign is done. Yeah, that's not really end game. That's really just to help you potentially level or to, you know, I don't know, do something fun. Bounty system. There is the, 70 to 100 process after you get to World Tier 4. Yeah, that can be considered end game, but to be honest, the leveling process is running the same World Tier 4 dungeon over and over again, assuming your meta strategy, right? The Renown grind's not endgame. To me, endgame is Nightmare Dungeons, and they get a 7 out of 10 for me. The reason why that is because Nightmare Dungeons are going to scale to Tier 100. You could also include potentially the Pinnacle boss, the Lilith Pinnacle boss in the endgame. But yeah, this is actually really engaging. There's a little bit of strategy to the affixes, where you're going. It allows you to mix up the dungeons that you're heading to, so you get a little bit refreshing of scenery. It's very similar to your standard ARPG, mapping or greater rifts or whatever you're doing. The only difference is, well, you have to pay attention to your affixes all the time because these are game changers. And to be honest, it suffers from the main problem that all other ARPG content suffers from. And that is, it is the same content, essentially, over and over and over again as you min-max your build and eventually reach the highest tier, which in this game is 100. To me, the criticism of the endgame content in this game is that it is repetitive and the same as any other ARPG content. So if you're expecting something different from other ARPGs, you're not going to get it. But that doesn't mean it's not good. It is still good. It's just not super, super entertaining. After you've kind of figured out the affix that you want to go for, after you figure out like, okay, I already maxed my build out, etc. Hopefully in the future, they might add something cool, like some sort of goal in mind, like the Pinnacle boss, because I actually think the pinnacle boss is a really, really cool idea to have in the game, where you're going through and you kind of ramp up to this tier 100 fight, which is really, really cool. And I wish they have more things like that to unlock specific pieces. But because you actually unlock all your end game gear at level 70 in World Tier 4, there isn't really much of a reason to grind out these higher tier Nightmare Sigils. And to be honest, the end game content isn't really worthwhile at all. Like the game kind of, endgame rather, can be started at level 70 because you get your build finished up, because you go ahead and you can start doing nightmare dungeons, right? And then of course the true endgame is beating that tier 100. And to be honest, I personally would love to do that eventually, but I'd also just want to go ahead and run other characters. I feel like that's the true endgame for me, and that's kind of where I go to the next part of this review, which is what now? Now, according to my ratings, in terms of just straight up adding them together and averaging it out, I give Diablo 4 a 7.66. However, in my opinion, some things weight a little bit higher. For example, the quality of life to me actually is weighted a little bit higher. So the fact that it's so low actually might bring down the score a little bit. But things like group play, things like the campaign, things like how the game feels are weighted higher as well. So I think 7.6 is probably a good rating to stop on. Now, one of the biggest things, as I've said in my previous videos, which I kind of gave the game like an 8.5, that was sort of my initial impressions of the end game, and I think that it is dropped since then, mainly due to that quality of life. The gameplay is so good, but there are a lot of things in this game that seem odd to me that they just don't have. And the most annoying thing to me is the fact that I can't refund all my Paragon points. Now, again, this might not matter to a lot of casual players, but a lot of people that are going to get to those more endgame points, this is going to matter a lot. So if I were to take away the quality of life and assume that it's been, kind of bumped up a little bit, fixed a couple of these really easy things to fix, it would end up in that 8.5 out of 10 for me for the game. To me, it is my favorite ARPG out of them available to me. I just didn't have as much fun in Diablo 3. I don't think Diablo 2 is nearly as fun. I think PoE is probably my second favorite, or maybe even Last Epoch. I played a lot of Last Epoch. In fact, I think Last Epoch is probably my second favorite so far. But yeah, this game is pretty solid, and I would definitely recommend purchasing it if you can afford it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what now? What are we doing on the channel? What are we doing in the end game? What do you do when you reach this point in the game, slash when I reach this point in the game? Well, for me, my plan is to make new classes. In fact, I put a poll on the channel, and you can vote for which class I am going to pick next. So if you want to go ahead and influence that, then be sure to do so. Also, the other grind in the game is to reach that tier 100 nightmare dungeon, which is something that I would like to do eventually. But I might do it potentially in future seasons, or maybe I'll just do it on the side because I do want to try out all the other classes. And as for everyone else, what are you doing, or what should you be doing? Well, it's really up to you. You can sit there and grind your way up to level 100, but again, the gameplay doesn't really change between level 70 to 100 that much. You can grind to 100, you can make new classes. At the end of the day, the goal of ARPGs generally is to make a strong character, blast some demons, and then reset it and do it all over again. That's literally what every ARPG out there does that I know of or that I've played, right? You have PoE, Diablo 2, Diablo 3, Diablo 4, you have the seasons, you have the powerful builds, you run in, you kill things, you blow up, and then you restart. And you maybe make new characters, you try out different classes, etc. And this game is very friendly towards alts because all of your renown is shared between alt characters, and all of your campaign progress is shared, so you'd skip campaign, your mount is shared, etc. New seasons, well, mount and campaign are skipped, but you still have to grind for the renown at current moment, so we'll see what that is like going forward. But I am excited to see Season 1. I'm also excited to play all the different classes, and if you're excited as well to see all that type of stuff, be sure to sub, guys. I'll have a ton of Diablo 4 content coming. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think about Diablo 4 in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all for the next one.